Finance Committee. And in 2003, he was named National Republican Legislator of the Year. As Lieutenant Governor, he headed the Department of Culture, Recreation, and Tourism, where he created the Louisiana Pick Your Passion campaign and led the state's tourism efforts to 4 consecutive record-breaking years. Dardenne conducts many special presentations about Louisiana, including Why Louisiana Ain't Mississippi, a lively look at the state's culture, history, music, literature, and politics. He is a member of the Baton Rouge High School Hall of Fame, the LSU Manship School Hall of Fame, the LSU Hall of Distinction, the Louisiana Political Hall of Fame, and the Louisiana Justice Hall of Fame. Please welcome Jay Dardenne.
Thank you, Linda. That just means I'm old. Let me start with a little bit of a history lesson some of us will recall. 8 bridges crossed the Mississippi River. The first, the Huey P. Long Bridge, was constructed in 1935 for $13 million. The second, the Old Bridge, constructed in 1940 for $8.4 million. The third was the so-called Bridge to Nowhere, the Sunshine Bridge, in 1964 for $40 million. The fourth, which one day will probably become the Old and New Bridge, was constructed in 1968 for $46 million. And the latest, the John J. Audubon Bridge in 2011 for $409 million. It's past time for a new bridge, and that's what I want to be able to talk about today and give you some reasons why it makes sense, why I hope and expect the legislature to act this session, and why the time is now. Because if not now, when? That's the question that everyone needs to be asking. If not now, when? The question needs to be posed to the 143 members of the legislature, particularly to those members whose districts and communities will be touched directly by the construction of a bridge that now has only been a dream, particularly to those 8 senators, 16 representatives that represent East Baton Rouge, West Baton Rouge, Iberville, Ascension, and Livingston, and particularly to those in key leadership positions and those on the money committees where the decisions will be made. And in fact, a decision was made this morning to get the ball rolling, which I'll mention in just a second. The key answer to that question, in my view, is that the legislature needs to commit a sum certain to this project in the funds bill that has been presented to the legislature and gives an opportunity to use one-time money for this important one-time purpose. Now, why $500 million, which is what the administration has recommended? That was not just an arbitrary number pulled out of the sky, although it certainly seems that way at a round number like that, $500 million, but the present day earmarked or present day estimated cost for construction of the bridge and the improvements to the roadways that will lead to the bridge is at least $2.5 billion. As we know, those numbers are going up daily, and we're certainly experiencing that already when it comes to our capital outlay projects and other infrastructure needs, because bids are coming in way higher than was anticipated with the supply shortage that is there and the increased costs that we're feeling all over the country. But right now, the projected cost would be around $2.5 billion. This is about a 20% contribution that the state of Louisiana could point to and say, we are stepping up, we're using that money for the particular purpose of drawing down additional federal dollars, which I'll talk about in just a second. In essence, it would be a pledge, not in the legal sense, but certainly in the policy sense, to say that the state is willing to commit 20% of the present day price tag. This is going to enable DOTD to use these funds as hard evidence of the state's commitment. It enhances the department's chances of meaningfully competing for competitive grants that are going to be plentiful as a result of the recent bipartisan infrastructure bill and many other pots that probably are going to become available. It enables the department to proceed with credibility as it seeks third-party developers to enter into public-private partnerships to make the bridge a reality. It provides those precious dollars that can help minimize the inevitable tolls that will be a part of the project of this magnitude. And that's an important component of the amount of money that the state contributes on the front end. On the back end, it will reduce the amount of tolls that will have to be imposed in order to make the project a reality. And as we know, we often hear talk about comparing Louisiana to Texas and to Florida, states that have no income tax. As a practical matter, those states are heavy into tolls, and anyone who travels in those states recognizes that. And that's a way that those projects have been funded in those states. And we have not been a heavy toll state through the years, but a project of this magnitude is going to require that level of contribution. But obviously, we want to keep it as minimum as possible. Every mega project of this size and scope needs a meaningful launching pad, a place to start, and now is the time to make that happen. It is not an excuse to say the project is too far off. It is upon us. It is upon us because the mandatory environmental requirements, the right-of-way acquisition demands, and the complex financing plan that the project demands is right at our doorstep. Public meetings will begin within a week of the 10 sites that have been previously identified as possibilities. 3 of those will be shortlisted for environmental review by June of this year. So within the next several months, we will have 3 potential sites, which is required in order to proceed with the environmental study that is a mandatory prerequisite to get the decision made as to where the bridge would be and where the approaches would be. The preferred alternative will be approved by the summer of '24. It's not an excuse to say that we need a definite site before we commit this much money. There is this lengthy federal process that must be followed that I just described, and I'll talk about in a little more detail in just a moment, but we can't afford the luxury of waiting right now. You don't wait until you have the site in order to trigger your funding components, because you have to have the money in place to begin the environmental review and to begin the process of identifying the development team that is going to be put together to act once the site is ultimately selected. And it's not an excuse to say it's too much money to sit idle. This money is not going to sit idle. Obviously, there will be interest accruing on the money that is not spent in the short term. And more importantly, it will be used as a sum certain by the Department of Transportation and Development to say to the federal government as we apply for these competitive grants, here is a local match that the state is putting up in order to secure those federal grants. These are going to be highly competitive grants, as you can imagine. Even though the amount of money that is poured into this state and poured into every state from Washington in the wake of the pandemic, these are going to be competitive grants. And states will be competing against each other, local governments will be competing against each other, and it's critical that Louisiana be poised to have the requisite match necessary to draw down money in these competitive grants. This is going to be an attractive project. It is going to be one that makes sense for anybody who's traveled on our interstate, and that's a lot of people, not just in Louisiana. So we have a good story to tell, but we have to make certain that there's a sum certain there to deal with it. Now we literally, and it's not too trite to say this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to take advantage of a serendipitous series of events that have led to the fiscal status of Louisiana as we sit right now. We're in a position where we're providing, and I think we will provide when the budget process is over, an unprecedented level of funding for infrastructure investments and investments in education at the K-12 level, at the higher education level, and at the early childhood level. The American Rescue Plan and the bipartisan infrastructure bill have arrived at a moment in time when the state has a $700 million surplus from FY21 and an excess in the current year of $800 million plus. And those numbers are both going to grow, I would suggest to you, when the REC meets on May the 9th. All the indicators from our economists and all of the specific reports monthly from the beginning of this fiscal year suggest that we are doing better than our budget forecast suspected. We obviously, because of the belt tightening and the conservative forecasting that was prompted by the pandemic, we've also seen a strong return of Louisiana's economy, and that has enabled us to make significant contributions to the mandatory contributions to the UAL fund, to the Rainy Day Fund. The Rainy Day Fund is now greater than it was when Governor Edwards took office. And the unfunded accrued liability is well on its way to being satisfied in accordance with the constitutional mandate. And we are in a position this year, as we have recommended to the legislature, to repay the federal government monies that have been accrued over a series of years, dating back to Katrina and Rita hurricanes and moving forward to other events that the state has a cost share that it must ultimately pay. We're using one-time money to make that payment. We're using one-time money to make that second installment on the HIDRAS obligation that we have to the Corps of Engineers for the development of the New Orleans flood system. All of that is being handled with one-time money. All those are appropriate mechanisms to pay down our debt with the largesse that we're experiencing right now. As mentioned already, the public meetings to review the 10 proposed sites will begin next week. The process of procuring a P3 partner will begin on May 1st of this year, before the legislature even adjourns. By July 1st of 2023, the state will select a development team to be approved by the legislature. That team will have the required expertise in engineering, in finance, in construction, in maintenance, and in tolling. The NEPA review process, the environmental review necessary to advance to construction, will be completed by the summer of '24, if not sooner. Thereafter, a comprehensive agreement will be reached with the development team to start the design, build, financing, operation, and maintenance no later than the summer of '25. That's going to be upon us much quicker than we think. And if we don't have the requisite funding in place to move forward, we're not going to be able to move forward. That's why it's so critical that the legislature act now to make the monetary commitment that I've spoken of. Thereafter, today, Louisiana is awash in one-time money that can and should be spent on one-time priorities. The stars are aligned for us to be able to make the type of monetary investment that's required to make this bridge a reality. Is the bridge a priority? Legislators beginning today have the chance to answer that question. Now, let me tell you what happened earlier this morning. The Appropriations Committee passed out every one of the budgetary-related bills this morning, from the budget itself, HB 1, to the supplemental bill, the ancillary bill, the legislative funding bill, the judicial funding bill, and a couple of others. The funding for the bridge, we had requested $500 million in the supplemental bill. That is the money that we have currently in excess over the REC estimate for the current year. We had suggested $500 million from that source of funding in the funds bill, and we had suggested creating a fund into which that money could be placed that was designated specifically for this purpose. What the committee did this morning was it took that $500 million and it created a fund called the Radial Fund. And I told them I like the name, but I don't want the bridge to be a spare tire. The Radial Fund is revitalizing and developing infrastructure in all of Louisiana. And that's a nice acronym for funding. And what it does, though, it creates the fund in two parts. $400 million is to be deposited and credited into a construction sub-fund, and $100 million is to be deposited into a preservation sub-fund. So right off the bat, that $500 million by definition is reduced to $400 million because we're not interested in preservation when it comes to the bridge. We're interested in a new construction project. That remaining $400 placed into this fund is not earmarked for the bridge, although the bridge clearly would be a possible source of receiving those funds, but as could other entities and as could other projects. Now, we have also suggested funding for other mega fund projects like the bridge in Lake Charles, like the I-49 extension south. We've recommended $100 million for each of those two funds. My sense is, in listening to what some of the legislative talk has been, is that the idea is to pool that $700 million, the two that we earmarked for those two specific projects and the $500 earmarked for the bridge, into this singular fund. And that's the right amount. I mean, that's the amount of money we'd like to see earmarked for these projects, but not necessarily for preservation. We have other dollars that we're recommending, one-time dollars, ARP dollars, other sources of money that we have to be used for preservation. We need the full $700 million for construction of these mega projects. And as I've mentioned previously, it's very important from my vantage point that $500 million be placed in a specific fund for the Baton Rouge Bridge to evidence the commitment and take away any uncertainty as to whether the bridge would be competing with other projects for those dollars. The reality is we have plenty enough money to go around to be able to invest in these infrastructure projects, to be able to do the kind of things we've talked about doing for years in infrastructure in Louisiana and in education in Louisiana. We just have to proceed with doing it. The issue should bypass, and that is, I guess, an intended pun, but the issue should bypass any partisan rift, any political agenda, any hard feelings that are held right now in the legislature. It's not about that. This is about Republicans and Democrats and independents. It's about blacks and whites. It's about East bankers and West bankers. It's about commuters and interstate travelers. It's about diesels and hybrids. It's about all of those motorists who are going to cross that bridge or who are going to take advantage of a bypass around the main interstate function of Baton Rouge, which is going to continue to thrive. This is just creating an alternative to get around it. Every eastbound, westbound motorist in the southern United States knows the need. I think 143 legislators know the need. Certainly the administration and the governor knows the need. So the question remains, if not now, when? And with that, I'll try and answer any questions that you have as best I can.
Is your concern right now that not only is the amount gone from 500 to 400, but the 400 is now in a pot basically for everything or any infrastructure-related proposal?
Yes, but I will say this. I mean, this is obviously the first step in a process, and I know the House members have been talking to the Senate members, and there's a lot of chatter going on about what to do, and I do think there's a commitment there to do something. We think $500 million is the magic number, and we think having it in a pot specifically segregated for the Baton Rouge Bridge is the most important two components to being able to give DOTD every arrow in its quiver to draw down these federal dollars. So the creation of the fund itself is a good idea, but I think there ought to be specific amounts allocated within those funds to have what I'm calling a sum certain.
Brack put out a report a couple weeks ago that said legislators are trying to have it both ways. I take it from what you're saying, you see them as having a sincere belief in wanting to provide money for a Baton Rouge bridge, even though the amount is very much unclear.
I do think that's correct. I think the majority of members recognize the need and want to do something, and I think we're going to be talking about how much is enough, and I think that discussion will take place in earnest after REC meets. The timing of the bills coming out of the Appropriations Committee and out of the House, because they're going to get them out on Thursday of this week, really kind of precludes that discussion until after the REC meets. But I do think there is a generally held view that we need to take advantage of this moment in time and use one-time monies to advance these mega projects that we know on their own cannot survive without a huge infusion on the front end and without a lot of money coming from the federal government. And this is the best way to get that money, is to have a pot that can be pointed to as available match as these decisions are made on competitive grants. Yes, sir.
Jay, why would they spot $100 million the magic number? And what's the impact if they say it's $400 million, $350 million, or whatever the number is?
The $500 million, as I mentioned, it represents 20% of a $2.5 billion estimated project. And typically, you're going to have a 20% match. You may have sometimes more, sometimes less when you're going after federal dollars. And I think it just sends the right message to say the state of Louisiana, at the time of having all this one-time money, recognizes the importance of this project and is going to earmark this money for that project. That's the reason, I think, for the 500. That's the reason for saying it is earmarked for this particular purpose, not subject to some determination to be made later by the legislature, by the Joint Committee on the Budget, or by whoever at some point in time. I think certainty is our ally in this fight right now to try and make sure certain we have the money.
Okay. In light of what we've been discussing here, I know Clay Shake Snyder, Paige Cortez have both spoken out against this plan right now. Have there been any talks between the governor's office and those two gentlemen as far as maybe reconvesting, and what efforts have to be taken to get them on board?
There has certainly been communications with both from, not from me about this particular subject, but I know from individuals within the administration. And I actually think both the Speaker and the President recognize the need and the importance of this project. And I hope at the end of the day they're going to be supportive of a plan that provides the money that I'm talking about today, or provides a meaningful way to make certain that there's a state commitment to the project.
Okay.
Yes.
Would you call the radio fund the creation of loopholes for this money?
Well, I don't know that I'd say loopholes. It was a bit of a surprise. Obviously, we didn't have any specific discussion about it, but I think what it does is, if it's designed to put the money, to pool the money in one fund and at some point later on decide how it gets divided up, that does defeat the primary purpose that I think the legislature ought to have, which is to say we're willing to commit X amount of money to this project. I would hate to see us come out of this session without a hard dollar commitment to the Baton Rouge Bridge. That gives us the best chance to make it a reality and not just something that we keep talking about and pushing down the road. Yes, ma'am.
Given that the I-10 widening project, the 7-mile project that's currently approved and moving forward, is $1.3 billion, how realistic is the $2.5 billion bridge project?
Well, I think it's very realistic if we take advantage of the moment and provide some state funding for it, and we're successful in applying for federal grants. I mean, the time is now that this kind of money is all of a sudden available. That $2.5 billion number is a present day assessment. As I've said, things are going up, and I think that's a conservative number, unfortunately, just given the reality of where prices are, where steel prices are, and where we will be once the project commences. But the key right now is to make a monetary commitment so that when the dollars have to start being spent, the money will be there from the state standpoint.
Part two, I know that we're very focused on the environmental impact of the bridge. Will there be an economic impact study done?
There's already been one. Lauren Scott, 2020, Lauren Scott provided an economic impact study in 2020. I'm not sure who it was done for. It may have been done for one of the advocacy groups, but it obviously talks about the economic impact of the bridge and the approaches, because industrial development, commercial development is going to follow an interstate alternative. We certainly saw it in Lake Charles, which is one of the examples he points to. We saw it in Baton Rouge when the old new bridge was constructed to take traffic off of the old bridge. And Lauren, as I appreciate his study, used those two as the checkpoints against which he balanced his determination that there would be a significant economic impact. I don't remember the numbers, you'd have to look at the report, but I don't think anybody has any question that there would be economic development opportunities that will follow. And don't think for a moment that I-10 is going to suddenly become traffic free. It is going to be the primary artery for internal traffic in Baton Rouge. It's going to be the primary artery for people traveling east and west through Baton Rouge, particularly if they know that the bypass is available to take some of the traffic elsewhere that doesn't need to be getting off exits in Baton Rouge. So I think it brings an economic development component that is real, and obviously it alleviates and helps alleviate the incredible congestion that we all experience anytime you have to go east across the river or go west across the river.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Jay, you noted that there may be a toll associated with this bridge. There's been some legislation filed to stop tolling or prevent it from happening. I know that was kind of stopped, but tell us a little bit about the temperature for tolls on the bridge and any other road here in the state.
Well, I think right now the discussion on tolling from my standpoint is on this bridge. I mean, realistically, I don't know that we can put together the kind of funding that is necessary. At least I'm parroting now what I understand from the department and their evaluation and looking at potential third-party investors and what have you, that tolling is going to have to be a component of it. It doesn't mean it has to, in fact, it can't be an unreasonably high toll. It's got to be a reasonable toll to have any meaningful impact at all. And that's another reason why it's so important for the state to make this significant of a commitment early on so that as the plan is being developed, it can be done with the knowledge that the state has put up this significant amount of money that is going to reduce the amount that the toll may be. I don't think any anti-tolling legislation will have a chance in the legislature. I think there's a recognition that it is going to have to be a realistic part of any plan for this bridge. Now, as it relates to anywhere else in the state, and I know there's a proposed one in the Lake Charles Bridge, but other than that, I don't hear a lot of talk about tolls, and I don't think you'll see them anywhere else. But I think a project, a mega project like this is going to probably require some tolling for the period of time that the bonds are in place at the least. Yes, sir.
So Jay.
Oh, yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Barriers. If you get the money going forward, what about local government wanting to have more of an input in the actual location?
Well, the actual location is going to be a publicly vetted process. It'll begin soon, and there'll be opportunities to talk about every possible location that's in the hunt. I think at the end of the day, there is going to be a selection made. It's going to probably not please everybody who may have wanted it to go somewhere else, but it's going to be a consensus determination, and obviously local governments will have an opportunity to participate in the public process. At the end of the day, the decision is going to be made based on what makes the most sense, how much right-of-way needs to be acquired, where it's positioned relative to other bridges, because you don't want it too close to the Sunshine Bridge, you don't want it too close to the old new bridge. It's got to be at a place where it's going to provide reasonable alternative, and I think that decision is going to be made based upon the facts.
Jay, the governor has talked about this being a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and I know you don't want to say what the minimum amount you need is, but if the session ends with a minimal commitment for the bridge, do you see this just basically being put off for the foreseeable future, that this won't happen?
Well, no, I can tell you it's not going to be put off no matter what, because we're going to have to go through the process of applying for these competitive dollars. The question is whether or not we have a realistic application or not. And the realistic application comes with a commitment that the state makes so that we can say in the application process, this is what the state has designated to be a local component of this very expensive project. So that's why I think it's important, and I keep talking about a sum certain and an earmark for this particular project, to use that word that's not usually used in Louisiana. It's only used federally, but we have to say this is the state's commitment to this project in this amount of money, I think, to enhance and optimize our chances of being successful in the competitive bids. It can't go away. That would be foolish for us to give up on this. It's been a pipe dream for so long, and now, as I say, this moment in time is here that we have a chance as a state, as a legislature, to make it a reality. All right. Yes, sir.
Has anyone estimated what it would cost in 5 years if it were to take that much longer?
Well, I'm sure that there are going to be folks out there who are doing that very calculation as they make a decision whether or not they want to apply to be a part of it, because that process is going to begin in earnest pretty soon. And so the people who come forward with the expertise to do this are obviously going to have to be calculating what the eventual cost will be and how we will go about finding those dollars. It seems to me pretty obvious that if we're not willing to commit the kind of dollars we're talking about to this project, it is going to frustrate a number of people who might otherwise want to be a part of the process. The state's got to have a significant share and a significant stake in the project. And I think it's inevitable to say that the cost is going to go up year by year by year. That's all the more reason that we act now while we have this opportunity and while we have these one-time dollars and while we have a lot of money to satisfy a lot of other needs in the state. It's not like we're taking money away from other places in the state. When you look at the ARP money and you look at the surplus from last year, the excess from this year, and the budget projections for next year, we have an unprecedented level of funding that is going to enable legislators to satisfy a lot of the needs that they have in their individual districts and still provide the kind of generous dollars to this project that we're advocating. John?
You mentioned the Lake Charles Bridge. Has there been any money during this session set aside for the Baton Rouge Bridge, or suggested to be set aside?
Well, the suggestion of the administration that the governor's made is $500 million for the Baton Rouge Bridge, $100 million for the Lake Charles Bridge, and that's because the Lake Charles Bridge is much further along than is the Baton Rouge Bridge. It is a work in progress in essence, and its timeline is moving forward, and $100 million provides them with the money they need to keep on track with where they believe they are and where they want to be. That's why there's a discrepancy between the amounts. The Baton Rouge Bridge has nothing and hasn't gotten off the ground at all. I shouldn't say that. It does have something, because a lot of the work that's been done leading up to this moment by the department is because there has been some funding to be thinking about what we do, but not the level of funding we need to draw down the federal dollars that are going to be available. Lenny?
Some of the match in the infrastructure, new infrastructure bill are at 35%. Some are, I don't know if the 80-20 is still the match for the traditional interstate route. Is there basically some kind of fudge figure in this that the state might or might not be in a position to do this without some additional funding?
I don't know the answer to that. I'm just not sure what the match requirement will be. All we can do is work off of what we think are present day estimates and present day dollars that are available to us. Depending on what REC does, you certainly could make an argument that new dollars are available in the supplemental bill for the current year or in the budget for next year would justify an even greater contribution that the state could make. Because the more the state contributes, the more likely it is that we will attract the type of P3 partners we're looking for, and that we will be successful in these competitive grants that we know are going to be forthcoming from the federal government. And we have also, just as an aside, as you know, we've proposed a significant amount of one-time money to the department to take advantage of other opportunities that are going to come their way for projects, not the bridge, not just the bridge. So it's not like we're putting all our eggs in the bridge basket. There are a lot of other projects that are going to be funded as a result of the money we've suggested go to DOTD.
Does that, you mentioning that, has there been a substantial amount of money from the surplus dedicated or suggested to be dedicated to that huge figure of maintenance that had to be caught up on all the state roads?
Well, we've recommended consistently every time that we've had a surplus, you have the 10% that goes to the unfunded accrued liability, the 25% that goes to the rainy day fund. The remaining dollars we have always recommended be divided into three pots: a pot for coastal projects, a pot for capital outlay projects, and a pot for infrastructure highway projects. The legislature has not always gone along with that specific allocation. That's what we suggested again this year. I think the numbers were skewed just a little bit to make sure DOTD got a little bit more to take advantage again of these match needs for other infrastructure projects. But basically that's what we've advocated for the use of that one-time money. And it's what's required anyway. The Constitution tells us those are the areas you've got to spend the money on. Okay, thank y'all very much.